time I summoned a demon and now he won't leave me alone.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If the three of you would be so kind, would you mind introducing yourselves?
Hi, I'm Aaron. I am one of the founding members of Falls of Rauros. I formed it with Ray, who's actually not here tonight, who plays drums for us, but we formed back in 2005. And I play guitar and do vocals.
I'm Jordan. I play guitar and also do vocals, and I'm with Falls of Rauros since 2006. So for a long time now. And yeah, that's enough for now, I guess.
I'm Evan. I play bass, and I've been with the band since 2009.
And how would you describe the music of Falls of Rauros? What is Falls of Rauros?
I'd say it's always debated. I think its deepest roots are in black metal, but it's such like a tenuous connection at this point that it's an extreme metal with folk and black metal and rock kind of all mixed in.
Evan and Jordan, do you guys want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I think that like our basis, whenever we start writing new music, is still black metal, although we've been kind of like opening ourselves up to other extreme metal styles as sort of a basis for different parts. But yeah, black metal, post-black, that's a thing. Not really a term that I use generally, but I've seen it thrown around. So just like black metal as sort of the core, and then lots of other styles sort of grafted into that.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to our sound. I agree with the other two. I will say that we listen to a pretty wide range of music overall, and I think those influences kind of creep in, but it's maybe hard for me to put a name on all of them. It's a pretty wide range.
So this comes up regularly on the podcast just because these terms get thrown around a lot, and I'm not sure any two people really use them in the same way. But when you say that Falls of Rauros has a tenuous connection to black metal at this point, what is black metal, and what is it about the genre, or maybe about your own music, that you feel that you guys don't fit in what the popular conception of black metal is?
I think it's just the kind of thing where it's a genre that has a lot of, really like rabid followers, and they tend to have a pretty narrow definition of what that is, which I understand in a lot of ways. It's kind of, I think, what appeals to a lot of people, including myself, when I got into black metal, is that it's so like transgressive and kind of inhuman. Like there's sort of like this like mystical like aura about it. It just doesn't seem like your typical human experience. And that kind of limits the ways you can express yourself and be considered black metal. And I understand that we fall pretty far outside of those lines, and we always have, but we've drifted further from that over the years, just into other territory. And I think that's fine. I love the classics, always have, but I just don't feel like any of us would be content writing in that style at this point.
Yeah, I don't think I have a good addition to like what black metal is. I don't think we've ever been really interested in being considered like, I don't know. I don't even know what the terminology is anymore, but like true black metal or whatever. I don't think we've ever cared about that. And we've talked about this a bit though, that like all of the second wave bands are all pretty weird and different. And then this sort of idea came around that there's like this standard black metal style that you should be shooting for if you want to be like true or whatever. But all of the Norwegian and Swedish bands are different from each other, and all have their own like little weird things that they do. So I think that in some ways we're like continuing that idea that actually sort of having your own identity is like a good, cool thing. But yeah, I don't know that it falls in the lines of what the broad definition of black metal is. Also, yeah, that aesthetically we sort of are not trying to be super mystical either.
No, I think we've had maybe black metal at our core. Like our core identity is, if we had to pick one genre, it would fall most under the black metal umbrella. But to Jordan's point, I mean, that definition, like the orthodox black metal, was most pure 30 years ago. There's been a lot of bands that have changed that for decades now. So we're absolutely in that same sort of vein, but we're pretty far from the root. And I think it's good. But I agree with Aaron. I think we all like the classics and we all go back to it fairly regularly and still enjoy that style.
Aaron, you mentioned that you founded Falls in 2005 with your drummer, Ray. What were your intentions at the time? What were you trying to achieve with Falls of Rauros?
We weren't necessarily trying to achieve much. We were still in high school and we had just really, really rudimentary recording equipment. And it was just kind of a thing where we wanted to record music with no intention of playing shows at all, like just totally just recording experiments. And so we just started pretty much writing and improvising some demos, and we would basically do a song, like write and finish a song in one day. And we just kind of did a series of those. And yeah, there really was no ambition other than, I guess we did send the demos out to some like radio stations and some, eventually even a few labels. So I guess there was an ambition somewhere in there, but the idea was pretty much just to experiment and weave together, at the time, really raw black metal in the American style, and then just neo-folk and whatever odds and ends we could cram into the compositions. We weren't trying to be clever. It was just having fun and trying something that felt new to us.
And Jordan, how did you find out about these guys and how did you end up joining?
We're all childhood friends, which like sort of the older that I get and the more bands that I meet, I feel like our story is actually pretty unique in that we're all childhood friends. We had all played music together like in high school and stuff. And actually I think Falls didn't start that much later than that for people. So I had listened to the demos and thought that what they were doing was really cool. And I basically said like, hey, you guys should do some live stuff. I'll play bass. And then I started playing with them basically. And I was playing bass through Light That Dwells in Rottenwood. And then, well, the timeline's a little bit confusing, but Evan joined at some point in there, also a childhood friend. And I switched to guitar and Ray switched to drums. He was playing guitar and like Aaron and Ray were both playing drums on the demos. So there was a bit of shuffling, but it's been pretty consistent for like over 10 years now. Yeah. So there was no discovery period. I always knew what they were doing and just sort of inserted myself into the situation. Now,
around the time you guys released your first album, there was I don't want to describe it as a movement because all these bands were working independently of each other for the most part, but an idea of US black metal, you might even call it a second wave of US black metal, started appearing. Bands like Agalloch, Wolves in the Throne Room, playing something very similar to what you guys were doing in the sense that it was this folk and post-rock influenced or inspired type of black metal. Did you guys realize that there were similar minds or similar things at work in other parts of the country?
We were definitely listening to Agalloch and Wolves in the Throne Room back in those days, especially Agalloch. I don't know that I really knew. I mean, Wolves in the Throne Room only had one album out, right? When we did our first one.
Yeah. When we were doing the demos, I don't think they had any albums out.
Right.
So it was kind of like at the same time we were starting up, but their first record came out in 2006.
Right. Yeah. We were super aware of them. Like both of those bands are a little bit older than us. actual age. So I think we felt, I don't know that we felt like we were peers with them at the time. We were kind of like looking for inspiration. And then also the earlier wave of US black metal, we were inspired by as well. Although our music didn't sound anything like that. So that's interesting. But yeah, we were aware.
Can you clarify that? Do you mean you guys didn't sound anything like the earlier US black metal bands?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the big thing when we were sort of very much starting, the dominant style of US black metal was like suicidal black metal, I think we were calling it. So bands like Leviathan and Zoster and Krieg and stuff like that. I don't think that we sound like them, but we were, at the time checking that stuff out. Yeah, that was the most popular US black metal at the time, I think, when we were starting out, unless I'm misremembering.
I think that's true. I mean, for me, yeah, like when we first started, and Wolves in the Throne Room they hadn't really hit. And Agalloch at the time, I had never actually thought of them as a black metal band on those early records. It kind of registered as like a gothic doom, like dark metal sort of hybrid. So when I thought of like American black metal, it was pretty much the stuff you mentioned: Leviathan, Zoster, Judas Iscariot, a lot of just really, really grim, really dark, kind of nothing like what we sounded like at the time.
I will just add, and I completely agree with the point about Agalloch, but I will add, like, if it wasn't clear, we were huge fans of that band. And like, we're all excited for Ashes Against the Grain when it came out. Like we were, very important band for all of us, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding you guys correctly, you were aware of what was happening, but it wasn't necessarily that you were influenced by what any of either the bands that we mentioned or other bands that were working in a similar vein were doing.
I mean, I think, yeah. So the other two had mentioned that, we'd been listening to the first wave black metal, and that's definitely true. I was in on that as well. And to Jordan's point, we all were huge fans of Agalloch, and I think we are all pretty heavily influenced by them to an extent. I'm not sure that I can't speak to Aaron and Ray when they're first getting their riffs down, but I think there was a certain interest in exploring somewhat similar ground. I think there were early uses of acoustic guitar and, adding in like folkier passages. So we were definitely influenced by them in general. And I think we were all listening to, at that point, the earlier US black metal styles, we were listening to, European black metal, power metal. There was a pretty wide range of genres even back then. And I think that, like neo-folk, I think we were probably listening to Tenny a fair amount at that point. So a pretty wide range. But yeah, we were all very aware of Agalloch's music at that point.
Yeah, and I think that an influence, especially on the early doesn't get noticed, is we were all big Opeth fans too, at least through, their middle period. The early records are still so special to me. So we were definitely heavily influenced by that and like their use of acoustic guitar as well. And just the way that they sort of weaved melody and death metal and grooviness together without making melodic death metal, like the typical Gothenburg sound, which is cool too. But yeah, so there's a bunch of other stuff that's not from the States that we were influenced by in the early days, for sure.
And I should point out, if we didn't make this explicit, but you guys are based in Portland, Maine. And I think when people think of black metal, for sure, people like Zaster or Jeff Rest were always a little bit isolated and kind of doing their own thing. But I think when people think of the U.S. black metal movement, it's a lot of stuff that was happening around the Pacific Northwest, and you guys were quite far away from that.
Yeah, we weren't a part of any regional scene, that's for sure. It felt in the early days, especially, very isolated up here. It's changed a bit over the years. We have some friends like Obsidian Tongue that are based out of Maine at this point, but there's still very few bands from the Northeast that we're friends with, for sure.
Maine is not a very large state or populous.
That being said, though, because of, becoming connected initially through the internet, I mean, Austin Lunn encouraged us to tour with his band Seder, and through him we met a bunch of people, and now where we've played with Alda and Pacific Northwest bands. So it does feel like we are a part of a scene, but not, it's like a national scene or like a North American scene even. So it just feels like we're a part of a bigger thing, whereas we weren't connected to that at all in the early days. It was just going to the music venues in Portland.
It's in a basement.
Yeah, playing in a basement. Yeah, and even before that, before we were playing, because we started pretty much playing live in punk basements, which was really, really fun. Highly recommended. But yeah, before that, there was sort of nothing. We were just starting in this weird void. Yeah, it makes me impressed that we kept it going in those days. It was, yeah, interesting.
There really wasn't any infrastructure around it for us. You're right. We were operating and there's no resources available at that point in our lives. And we were young. So I think that maybe comes to the territory a bit too.
So we'll jump to the new album in just a minute. I do want to ask though, Aaron, you mentioned that there were no intentions going into your early recordings, your early jams, but at the time that we're talking, you've got quite a few albums under your belt, and so clearly the band moved to something much more serious very quickly. Once that happened, what were your goals at that point? What were you guys hoping to accomplish?
So we're talking about after we started doing proper albums. Is that the question?
Yeah.
I think it's just kind of an organic progression. It's never been a career. We don't pay our bills with it. So in a way, it's kind of stayed the same as the early days to some degree. It's not high pressure. There's not a lot of business involved. So basically we got some traction with our first record, and it was just a bit empowering to see that some people cared and word was getting around, and that kind of just encourages you to keep writing. You don't feel completely defeated about the work you're putting in. And that's really all it took. I mean, we love writing music. It's definitely the focus of the band more than playing live shows or anything. So it's just been, one album at a time. Just you put one out, and then you wait a little while and you start to feel the itch to write some more songs at some point. And then, usually about 3 years, sometimes 2. It's just been just an organic process where we want to keep writing, and that's pretty much all it is.
And Evan and Jordan, same answer for you guys?
Thinking back when we were in our 20s, I think for a moment there was maybe an interest in making it a bigger part of our lives. Maybe I think we had flirted with the idea of maybe going on longer tours, maybe even a European tour, or possibly like a world tour. Like there was some feelings about what if we took it to the next step. I don't think it was ever pursued intentionally. We never quit all of our jobs and made a concerted effort for that to happen. But I think maybe had circumstances presented themselves to us in a way that was really compelling, we may have taken that leap. But especially now, we're really interested in writing music. We like continuing to explore new ideas and just get more material out there. And I think that's kind of where our heads have been for quite a few years at this point.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that has been said already. I do and did have ambitions to sort of like do music full time, but I never thought that Falls would be the only avenue for that. So I have another group too that I write for, and I teach lessons and stuff and perform. Like I did a classical guitar performance yesterday, and I've like pivoted into working on video game soundtracks and like work full time as a sound designer for video games. So it's kind of like all part of the same current for me. Falls is a huge part of it, and like the longest running part, and has, I think, reached the most people. But yeah, and I'm certainly open. Like we've talked a little bit about touring Europe next year and stuff like that. Like I don't want to paint the picture for people that we're like, throwing in the towel and like just not touring anymore. Right? Like we're going to do that stuff. It feels like we're not, because it's been so long with COVID taking over everyone's life, and we've been slow to get back to playing live intentionally, but I think we will do some stuff next year. And that's exciting to me. So yeah, but as far as like big lofty goals, I think I totally agree that our basic goals is just to keep writing music and keep exploring what we can do within our, how we can expand the Falls of Rauros sound and still remain ourselves. I think that's a question that interests all of us quite a bit.
So that's actually a good segue to talk about the new album.
Great.
It's called Key to a Vanishing Future, and it will be released on the 25th of March through Gilead Media and Eisenwald Records. Tell me a little bit about the writing process for this album and your intentions musically going into this.
As far as writing, it was written completely in 2020. I think we started around May of that year, and we're mostly wrapped up in the fall. And then we recorded it in December. So it was totally contained to that year. And for us, that was actually we wrote it pretty quickly. And I think it's due to a few factors. That was when the pandemic hit the US hard. So we knew there were going to be no shows. And because of that, there were no distractions really. I mean, there was like a genuine lockdown for a bit. And then, there just wasn't that much to do. So it was a perfect time to write music. So we just kind of threw ourselves into that over those 5 or 6 months, probably 6 or 7 months, actually. As far as intentions going into it, I don't recall exactly. I know we had discussed very loose parameters of what we wanted to do, which we often do when we start a record, but it never really ends up sounding like what we discuss. I think on this one, we floated the idea that we could make the songs a little bit shorter, not short by any means, but just, maybe not be reaching for 10, 12 minutes and see what we could do in like a 7-8 minute range, which we actually did follow through with, but that doesn't really describe the music. I feel like the music, I don't really remember what we wanted to do with the music. My memory of it is that it was just kind of organically, just some riffs were being written that sounded different. And we felt like it somehow could be made to sound like us. But I don't know if anyone else remembers like discussing how the album should sound, because it's not coming to me.
I think we had thrown around some ideas of playing some sort of simpler chord voicings and heavier, more intentionally heavy in a way that we hadn't really done before. And even more, I think we had focused on this for a few records, but more intentionally like drum and bass and rhythm guitar, like synchronizing, locking in for impact in a way that we just sort of expanding on what we had experimented with. More, not a lot, but more death metal influence just sort of sprinkled throughout. It's certainly not death metal, but I think just maybe darker chord shapes, chord voicings.
Yeah. It's a funny question because we often, when we first start the writing process, do have some discussion. It's usually pretty loose about what we want to do. And I thought it was funny when Aaron said following through, because so frequently we didn't follow through with what we set out to do. Like we go in, we have this general idea of what we're going for. And then like 2 weeks later, we're in a completely different area. And we just, we go where it takes us instead of trying to force a sound that isn't coming to us sort of organically. And I think over the years, like especially for the latest album, we've gotten a little bit better at keeping that in our heads, I think, long enough to write riffs and get something down. I think we did a good job. Good job, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we didn't speak about your writing process very much, but I understand that you guys write as a group.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah.
What are the logistics of that? How do you guys usually approach a song going in? I mean, you mentioned that there's a discussion and that there's some riff writing, but are you always in a room together when this happens?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think at least for the last, I feel like the last 3 or 4 albums have been sort of the same process, but we're, it's, evolving. But especially the last couple, Aaron and I will bring in some riff. We will basically work them through as a group, and Ray and Evan will write parts and suggest things and change our parts, and we will give feedback on each other's parts, and it becomes this like collaborative process. But I think usually it starts with guitar riffs, not always. And I know Ray wrote some guitar for the last album too, so there's definitely outliers, but I think that that's the general process.
Yeah, typically there will be some homework for sure that we're, kind of workshopping a riff by ourselves, or especially like writing solos and that kind of stuff. We don't do that as a group.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare.
But a lot of the like composition decisions are made as a group, just kind of, what if we tried this? And then there'll just be a lot of iterations until we're all, approving of how the part sounds.
The other 3 members of the band are all really great riff writers. So when they bring riffs to the practice space, a lot of what I'm doing is just trying to find a way to weave the bass and like almost triangulate between Jordan, Aaron, and Ray, just like locking in with the drums and then trying to find some melodic way of either accenting one of them or finding some middle ground that's interesting. It's a pretty great spot to be in.
And I definitely want to talk about Evan's contributions to this album, because I think the bass is used in a different way on this album than on previous albums, and maybe in black metal more generally. But the group arranging process doesn't really work for everyone. With the case of you guys, would you say that you're able to work in this way because of how long you've known each other?
I think it definitely helps. There are definitely slow moments. It's not always coming quickly. Sometimes we'll spin our wheels and it just doesn't seem like it's there. So it's not like, we all have different ideas and different tastes, and sometimes compromises have to be made. I think the trick is just that we're not, because we know each other and we're friends, it's not like a business arrangement. No one's throwing their weight around trying to kind of, have more control over how the song ends up. I think we just know how to cooperate, and that's pretty much all it takes. Sometimes it takes a while, but we get there.
Evan, I believe you mentioned finding a middle ground between what the other members are doing.
Yeah.
What would you say the role of the bass is in Falls of Rauros? And would you say that your approach to this album was different than on previous albums?
I would say the approach was different. As Jordan alluded to earlier, I think there's been more of a focus on tying the rhythm section together and turning us more into an instrument of the low end in a way that's really cohesive. The role of the bass, it's a bass. I think we all kind of have a general understanding of what it's supposed to do and like how it makes things heavier and how it can make certain things, or how it can like kind of add melodies that maybe weren't there in the guitar lines. It's a little tough because I like to make the bass as interesting as I can. And that usually is at odds with the traditional role of what a bass is supposed to do, which is like fill out the low end and add some heft there. So a lot of it is just working on each riff as they come. What is this riff? What does this riff need? What would be interesting, or does it need to be interesting? And should it just make that riff that Jordan brought to the practice, like really just that much heavier. And that process is pretty slow for me. It's not with that it's sort of pain. I'm often at odds with myself as to, well, is this part interesting? Or like, why is there even really bass here if it's just going to be playing, on the root note? And I struggle with that pretty regularly. But I think as the years have gone by, we've tried a few different things, and I've started to really like the approach that we've taken. In the latest album, I feel like we kind of reached it. I felt for the first time, probably ever, that there really wasn't a whole lot that I would change. I think that we found the pocket that it should be in. And whether that pocket is the same one going forward, I really don't know, but we'll find out.
Just to piggyback on that quickly, I do remember actually when we were discussing what we should do on the album, I do remember talking about rhythmic hooks as something we wanted to do more of, which is like, in a lot of like black metal and atmospheric black metal, it's very melody centric and atmosphere centric. And we just thought it would be interesting to focus on rhythm, and that kind of just put the bass in that role of as part of the rhythm section to do something interesting and different.
Yeah, the bass in underground metal, maybe specifically death metal more than the other genres, but it's often lost between the double bass drumming and down-tuned guitars. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the same is true for black metal, too. I think traditional black metal bass is, pretty uniquely straightforward.
Yeah. And in a lot of those bands, the bass is largely doubling up what the guitars are doing. And so I think when people hear this new album, I think it's quite clear that the bass has a different role than maybe what people are accustomed to hearing. And it's a role that I think, I don't know what the reviews for this album have been like or what the feedback has been like, but I think when Falls of Rauros is described as progressive or anything like that, that may be part of what people are referring to. Do you know what I mean? Like the bass has almost an older, it's more similar to the way the bass would be used in like 60s or 70s prog rock or psychedelic rock or stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we do look towards like rock bands a lot when we think of especially the rhythm section. A lot of the times the guitars are still doing metal parts like palm muting and tremolo picking and stuff like that. But when we think of like how should the drums and bass interact, it's usually rock bands that we look to for inspiration at this point.
Where did you guys end up recording this?
We recorded the drums at our rehearsal space, and then we recorded everything else at our own apartments. So we recorded everything separately from each other. And then after that, we sent it all like direct. So we recorded the guitars direct in to the computer and sent all those tracks to Colin Marston, and he reamped everything and made it sound good.
Yeah, Ray mic'd up his drums with the mics that he had. He might have bought some mics for it, but they're nothing like super fancy. Like, they're not like pro studio grade mics, but they are pretty good. And I think he was talking with Colin a lot, kind of getting like pointers on how to get, the best that we could do. It's not a treated room at all. It's, it's not like a professional studio. But it was good enough for Colin to work with. And then he kind of put some sheen and polish on the drums. I guess we did also we did vocals at the same room at the practice space, and we did acoustic guitars. But there's not too many of those on the record. It's just a few parts.
Now, is this the first time that you guys have worked this way?
No. I mean, yes, I guess. It's the first time we've sent tracks off to be reamped. But actually our first record, I mean, all the early stuff we self-recorded. The first record we self-recorded under really rough conditions and had a friend kind of salvage it a little bit and mixed it but just a friend. Like we didn't send it off to a professional mixer or anything. And then our second record, we recorded at our practice space, actually in the same building, just down the hall. And we actually mixed that one ourselves. I think Jordan and maybe Ray mixed that album.
Yeah, we did it together on like hilarious $50 computer speakers. Yeah.
Weren't you like mixing that record on tour? I feel like you were mixing it in the van.
We had like a headphone splitter, and Ray and I each had headphones on, and we were mixing on my laptop, like in the back of a 15-seater van, which is not recommended. Like, obviously, it's just, you're hearing so much stuff that is making your perception of what you're listening to wrong. But we didn't know, So yeah, it's kind of a tangent, but that was like an immensely frustrating process because we sort of knew what we wanted, but like didn't really have the technical skills to get there at the time. And I think we still got pretty much where we wanted to go. Like, I still think that the production of that album for what it is like pretty cool. But yeah, it was like trial and error with like novice skills. Yeah. And novice equipment.
Now, the DIY approach to recording and mixing that you guys had on the earlier albums, was that largely due to budget?
Yeah.
Or did you just want to handle that?
It was
yourselves?
budget. And then I think also the idea that like we were listening to so many, especially at that time, but still now, but especially at that time, listening to so many albums that like objectively sound awful. Like they sound terrible. But I think all of us loved that aesthetic. So it was fine. It's like, Hailwind and Hinoke is not the worst sounding black metal album, like objectively. So it's still like right there. But I think we decided at some point that we wanted to have higher fidelity recordings because, we were moving away from being primarily atmospheric into being more like, I don't know, not the opposite of atmospheric, but sort of more nuanced and detailed. And I think we all agree that like higher production values allow that to be heard. It also makes it sound heavier. So, yeah.
It's just nice to be able to bounce ideas off of an engineer who's experienced and can help guide us towards what we're looking for at 10% of the time it would take us to do ourselves. It's really nice to have someone else do it for us.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that. Is this the first time that you guys have worked with Colin?
We did.
It's not. Our last record, Patterns of Mythology, we did with Colin actually at a studio. That was the first time we worked with him. But we went down to Queens, New York, and recorded with him. So we would have done that again, I think, but the pandemic made it so it was either delay the recording until we could go to New York or just do it ourselves, and we didn't want to wait.
We mastered with him earlier though, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, he had mastered Vigilance Perennial, which was the album before Patterns, the one before we recorded with him. And then he mastered the split with Panopticon too, I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's probably true. Okay, we had like a relationship already, I guess.
Now, Colin's name comes up a lot on this podcast, and he's extremely well respected, and he's very, is it correct to say central? I'll say central. He's a big part of this black metal scene that's happening on the East Coast. For you guys specifically, what would you say Colin brings to your sound?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot. I think I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go as far to say that he's like a producer for the records, but he does definitely make some creative decisions that we sort of have to say yes to or not. So I'll say this. He has this book in his studio called Mean Deviation, which is all about...
Yes, of course.
Yeah. He had that. And I was reading it a ton when other people were tracking, when we were working on Patterns of Mythology. And so it became like the mean deviation, like he's, it's like make this part sound like mean deviation, right? Which means like, I think the part that I'm thinking of is like make it sound like Fate's Warning or something. So I think he has just like this vast library of music in his brain that he's listened to, so he can make that happen. And then I think also I recorded all the keyboards here. Actually, I did that for both records we did with him. And I would send him like rendered wave files. So like the sound that I wanted. And then also MIDI, which was the notes that I played, but not with a sound. And he always like picked his own sounds that were similar, but the sounds he picks were cooler usually. And like there's some synth flutes on the new album that I never would have chosen, but like them, for example. So I think he like is willing to take some risks that we wouldn't do for ourselves, but are happy that they happened. Yeah. What do you guys think?
I mean,
the flutes for sure.
Yeah, the flute stood out immediately. I think we all laughed and then said, yeah, let's do it. For me personally, I mean, my bass tone is much better with him at the helm than what I think we had captured previously. I think it really changed the overall sound of the bass. And then we've been keeping that sound now, and I intend to going forward. He brings stuff out of our instruments that I'm not sure anyone else is capable of doing. Like Jordan said, he has an extremely deep base of knowledge about really like probably all music. And he is willing to put the time in, and he will put in as much time as needed to make it sound good. He will get the best out of you and the best out of the material. It's hard to overstate how comfortable I feel, at least, and I'm sure we all do, with him working on the material, because we don't have to worry about certain things that we would working with other people. And that confidence is nice.
Yeah, he doesn't overproduce, which is great because he knows how to find the sweet spot where it's like there's a lot of ear candy, there's all this really nice tones and effects, but it never sounds sterile. Like it doesn't sound like a modern metal record if you're working with Colin, which is nice because that's not what we're looking for.
in total, as far as the production goes, or some of the musical ideas that you guys have on this album, how do you compare this album to, let's say, Falls of Rauros 10 years ago? What would you say the biggest difference is?
The biggest difference, so 10 years ago, I guess, would have been like our second record, The Light That Dwells in Rotten Wood. I think there's a lot of differences if you jump that many years. I mean, that record was very atmospheric, it's probably like the closest thing we have to sounding like a, quote, cascadian black metal band. And I think this new record doesn't sound like that at all. I mean, the keyboard, the synths are a lot more prominent. There's some synths in most parts of the album, and like mellotrons and synth flutes and all this stuff. We removed a lot of the acoustic guitars that we used to use a lot more heavily. And like the neo-folk influence is not really that prominent anymore. It's more like classic rock, psych rock, just different forms of rock. Like we've gotten really into just clean guitar tone as something to reach for instead of acoustic guitar, just because you can do a lot with it. And it's, I guess to us, it just started to feel like alternating between black metal and acoustic guitar had just been done too much by other bands and ourselves. So yeah, I think the differences are pretty prominent at this point.
I think we're all much better at our instruments too, just technically. And as arrangers too, I think we've gotten smarter at not trying to to choose guitar voicings that sound better with the certain type of distortion that we have, and like reworking one really complicated guitar part into two less complicated guitar parts because it'll sound better in the recording and be less stressful to play, and like all those things. So I think just becoming like all around better musicians, both as like creative musicians, but also just technically, which, and for better or worse for listeners, I know a lot of people think that Light That Dwells is their favorite record. Well, they know that it's their favorite record, and they're not like wrong about what they like. But yeah, I think that, we're just getting better as like crafts people.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think maybe kind of like the question on its head is like, what's similar maybe? And, because a lot really has changed in the sound of it all. But I think at least going from Believe in No Coming Shore forward, I think generally speaking, the songwriting process has been similar. Obviously, all the band members have been the same. And we've kept a lot of the democratic sort of songwriting style in there. And I think you can hear it. Like, I think if you listen to the discography going forward with each successive album, you're going to hear some changes, but you're going to find the thread that kind of keeps it all intact, keeps it all Falls of Rauros. And I think we've done a good job of maintaining that identity throughout all of the, decade plus of, personal and like professional changes that we've had in music. And yeah, I think we've found a way to make it still have that sound that I think you can listen to it and say, oh yeah, that still Falls.
Yeah, my take on it, having started with Rotten Wood, that was the first album that I heard, and going through your whole discography quite recently for this interview, what I hear on this album is, and I think Jordan alluded to this, there are musical ideas on this that weren't necessarily foreign or missing on your previous albums, but I think on Key to a Vanishing Future, they're delivered with maybe more conviction or more confidence. And I think that just comes from being in a band for so long and, having gotten that much better at your instruments. I don't want to use words like mature or technical or progressive, because people, those terms come with connotations and people don't always enjoy those connotations. But I feel like there's a growing up process on this album that you can really hear.
That's great. I mean, I like the idea of being a mature musician. People don't always like the more mature records by a band, myself included. Like, I don't always love a band's newest album, but the old ones are still there. So yeah, I think that's a compliment. Thanks.
So Key to a Vanishing Future will be out through Gilead Media in North America and through Eisenwald Records in the rest of the world by the time people hear this podcast. Fellas, what's the best way to get this album? How can people order it?
Probably the best way is to go to our Bandcamp, which is just fallsofrauros.bandcamp.com, or the Gilead Media Bandcamp. And you can order digital, CD, or cassette there right now. Vinyl is in the works, but everything's backed up right now. So I would expect to see that this fall, and pre-orders will be up eventually for those as well. There's going to be European and American editions. All the American editions are handled by Gilead. So for US fans, there's a Digipack CD, a cassette tape in 2 different colors, and there will be vinyl in, I think, at least 2 colors in the US. And then in Europe, there's a jewel case edition CD, blue and white tapes, and then 2 different colors for Europe of vinyl, but those will be a bit delayed.
And I'll mention too, while we're talking about physical releases, that Old Mill is releasing our entire back catalog on cassette as well. And those are coming out in April.
I think April 8th. Yeah.
April 8th. So if you're a cassette person and you want 6 new cassettes for your collection, maybe now's the time. So yeah, Old Mill Productions is doing those tapes. They look really cool.
And if people want to follow Falls of Rauros online, what's the best way to do that?
We aren't the most present online, but we have a Facebook page, which I don't even know what the address is, but if you search for Falls of Rauros, you'll find us. And we have an Instagram, which is just Falls of Rauros. I think fallsofrauros.official on Instagram, but you won't hear a lot from us because we don't use it too much.
A few times a year.
Yeah.
Maybe
if there's an album coming out, we'll do a few posts, but then we kind of disappear.
Is there anything else you guys want to say?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This has been a pleasure.
Good luck. Take care.
Take care, guys.